So today I'm going to tell you how bonds work and why it matters, especially if you're into Bitcoin or don't understand it. Some people aren't ready to hear this because it reveals dark truths about today's financial system. Only listen on if you're ready to understand what's really happening. What are bonds? Bonds are basically government IOUs. It's a way for governments to borrow money. They're basically a government debt instrument. How do they work? Say the government needs more money to build roads and infrastructures for cities. Who do they turn to? They ask investors like yourself for money. For example, you give the government £1,000 and they give you 5% interest per year for 5 years. That's £50 per year in passive income, and after 5 years, you get your full £1,000 back plus £250 in interest. Because the government was paying you 5% per year, remember? Now that sounds like a good deal, right? But the real question, how does the government actually pay off this debt to you? There are 3 ways governments repay their debts. 1. They tax their citizens and businesses. Seems legit, not too much of a problem there, so long as everyone is happy, right? But if taxes are too high, guess what'll happen to the economy? Businesses will leave the country where it's more tax efficient for them, which means fewer jobs and therefore less tax revenue. So if taxing people fails, there's not enough money generated from the people they tax. The government needs other ways to collect their income. They need a plan B. 2. They issue new debt to pay off old debt. This is where you come in. The government asks investors like yourself to give them money. They issue new bonds to someone else to pay off the interest on your bonds. In other words, they're using new debt to pay off old debt. You know what this looks like to me? This sounds like a Ponzi scheme or a MLM, multi-leveling marketing. The government are literally relying on new investors to pay off their old investors' bonds. And guess what will happen if there aren't any new investors giving their money to the government? If there aren't any new investors giving money to the government, the economy will go into a recession, which means less jobs, more crime, and more people suffer. 3. Otherwise, they just print more money. So, if there aren't anyone to tax, and there aren't any investors giving money to the government, who's gonna pay you that 5% per year? Who's gonna pay all the investors who gave money to the government through their bonds? That is where central banks come in. Central banks have the power to create money out of thin air. They print new money just to pay off the government bonds. So what's the problem in that? Central banks printing money out of thin air and using it to pay off the investors' bonds? Isn't that a win-win? No. Here's the problem. Every time central banks print new money, this will cause inflation in the economy. This will cause your groceries, fuel, insurance, houses, and everything to go up in price. Everything becomes more expensive. Every time central banks increase the money supply and stimulate the economy, you get poorer. Because if everyone has more money all of a sudden and the supply of everything remains the same, that means they'll all be able to afford to buy the same things. If everyone buys everything from the market because everyone has a lot of money all of a sudden, then eventually the market will run out of supply. This will lead to the market increasing their prices to balance out the demand. That way, they won't ever run out of supply. But the problem with that is that the poor people who don't have a lot of money, life will be more expensive for them. Poor people get hit the hardest. Inflation quietly robs the people with the least financial freedom. when the rich have access to more assets and tools, the poor are left chasing rising prices with stagnant wages. So the poor people really need something to fix this shit if they were born into it. So what's the solution? Taxing the rich isn't the answer, because it will lead to less jobs and more government printing. Flying to another country to escape isn't the answer either, because inflation will eventually creep into your lifestyle, especially when you're limited in a geographical income. Investing in equities, bonds and real estate isn't either, because you're just contributing to the government's Ponzi scheme. The one true answer is in something that the government can't control, that can't be inflated in numbers, that is transparent for every transactions made and can easily be moved from one location to another. The answer for the poor people to have an edge against inflation and all these degeneracies that the governments and central banks have created is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is decentralized, transparent, fixed in supply that can't be inflated in numbers and are borderless, easy to move your money from one country to another. Bitcoin isn't just an investment, it is your exit from the broken financial system, a tool for the people to fight back against inflation. So here's my final words. If you ever felt like the system was rigged against you, that's because it is. And now you know why. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more of these videos.